At least 133 people were killed and more than 140 injured after gunmen stormed into a packed Russian concert hall in Moscow.
Vladimir Putin claims that the four attackers had been heading towards the Ukrainian border when they were arrested, and Kyiv says they are laughable allegations. Steve Kinane has more from London.
He's given a televised address. He's described the terrorist attack, which has seen at least 133 people killed, as barbaric. He's promised retribution. He's also implied that he believes that Ukraine was involved. Let's take a listen to what he said relating to Ukraine in that particular part of the televised address.
All four direct perpetrators of this terrorist attack, all four who shot and killed people, were found and detained. They tried to hide and were moving towards Ukraine, where, according to preliminary data, a passage was prepared for them on the Ukrainian side.
So there you go, President Putin suggesting that the four alleged gunmen that have been detained were on their way to Ukraine. Now, the Ukrainian government and their intelligence officials have dismissed this as absurd. They're saying, why would they go to a border area where there would be so many Russian military and Russian intelligence officials as well? They've denied any involvement in the attack. And of course, it was Islamic State, the so-called Islamic State, the terrorist group, who claimed responsibility for this attack quite early on after the attack, this awful attack in Moscow, or on the outskirts of Moscow on Friday.
And Steve, there had actually been earlier warnings that an attack like this might happen. Tell us about those.
That's right. The US released some intelligence on March the 7th, telling its citizens in Moscow not to go to large gatherings. So they obviously had some intelligence that there were plans for some kind of attack. Apparently they passed that on to Russian authorities as well. It was really interesting what President Putin's response was at the time. He described this as a provocation from the West and suggested that they were trying to blackmail Russia. Now, this is a bit of a problem for Putin because he did publicly dismiss those warnings of a potential terrorist attack. And of course, his security state is spending a lot of time at the moment dealing with his ongoing war in Ukraine, but also political suppression of any opposition to the war back at home. And so there may be a suggestion that the security state, which he, of course, came from himself, being an ex-KGB colonel, that perhaps they've taken their eye off the ball here and should have been looking more at the jihadists in the Caucasus as part of Russia that have apparently, according to what Islamic State is saying, were responsible for this attack.
And as you say, Islamic State has claimed responsibility. Why are they targeting Russia?
Well, it's due to Russian foreign policy. The Muslim population of Russia is over 10%, and there are jihadist movements, particularly in the northern Caucasus. And some of them are deeply unhappy with some Russian foreign policy, particularly in relation to Syria, where Russia, of course, got involved there and propped up the Assad regime. Also, even in Chechnya, they're sometimes not very happy with the foreign policy that Russia's employed there, and even going back decades to Afghanistan. So there is a quite volatile jihadist movement in the North Caucasus in particular. This has been a problem for Russia over the past decade. They've prevented some terrorist attacks, but not prevented others. And certainly if we believe what Islamic State has said, they've been able to get away with this one in Moscow to just an awful, awful extent, with over 133 people killed, and we think perhaps more people will end up dying and others with horrendous life-changing injuries.